creative writing from the University of Iowa in 1952. Second one is in comparative literature from Iowa in 1969. And his PhD in comparative literature from the University of Iowa in 1973. A lot of us have seen Dr. Locke on campus in the halls. We've heard about him for several years, but a few things that you probably have not heard that are on his bio that I'd like to share with you are that this man, after taking time to slow down and Greenwich Village, sold newspapers and delivered dry cleaning. Later was an entrepreneur dance instructor in Florida. He has studied the following languages. No. French, German, Spanish, Latin, Old and Middle English, and Chinese. He would also have a number of affiliations, including the Modern Language Association, etc., etc. This man is highly qualified to speak to us today, and I'm sure that we will all learn why. Please welcome Dr. Locke.
That one first page file is a sort of scheme for selling a book that is called How to Quiet Your Mind, Relax the Body, and Talk Sense. And those three parts, I was thinking about this group communication, the idea of quieting the body. If you've had any experience with these radios in trucks and cars, or maybe you have some experience with radios on boats, where they've got it set up where you can't talk while the other person is talking. And when you think about that, that's a pretty handy situation, something you might like to have when you're teaching class, or you might like to have it when you're talking to your friend. Now, what the radio does is turn off the chatter that comes out of the mouth. So that's important. But there is another kind of chatter, that's the chatter inside the head. That little voice. Someone just told me before class that after you say that little voice, and someone in the group says, what little voice? You say, the little voice that just said to you, what little voice? The problem is that most of us talking so much of the time that if we go back and look at our students' notes, we discover that what they've written down has often very little to do with what we have to say. And if you check up on your conversation with your friends, very often they're not remembering what took place. And if you look at your own experience, especially I think those experiences where it was very important to you to remember, you may discover that your memory is virtually blank. If you don't have access to your memory banks as to what you saw and what you heard, what you remember is what you talked to yourself about while the event was taking place. And so one of the things I think is really important for us in communication is to learn to receive communication. And I think most of us are not really very well trained to do that. Now, the term we can use for this is stillness, or if we want to emphasize the idea of choosing to be still, we can talk about it as volitional stillness. That is to say that what we choose to do is to quiet down that chatter that allegedly is found among white Anglo-Saxon males as being mostly on the left-hand side of the brain, what is sometimes known as that left linguistic chatter. But if we can learn to be still, then actually we can allow our sense data to come in through our eyes and ears and be in our memory banks where it's accessible to us later on when we want to review that material. So I think it is in many ways extremely useful for us to learn to be still. If we don't learn to be still, and most of us have not, and I'm only really just a novice at learning to be still, that is to say, I think I can choose under most ordinary circumstances to sit and be still when I want to, but who knows what will happen when the next emergency occurs. We can't predict what will happen. So one of the problems with language is that it can be a form of static. It can get between us and remembering. Actually, our senses are probably still functioning, and actually I understand that that sense data, although it is not accessible to us from our conscious mind, that if someone starts sticking probes in our brain, things that we don't remember suddenly become recallable or replayable. So maybe we're not even able to completely prevent ourselves from perceiving, but we're able to prevent ourselves in practical terms from perceiving because we're not able to remember what we perceive. So one big problem is that language can be static. Now another aspect of language, and this is probably my most controversial section, is right from here and maybe even forward. I want to alert you today that as a teacher of proper English, of so-called good English, for years I inadvertently taught a kind of English that was extremely misleading map of the universe. It was a map of the universe that turned things into nouns, turned people into nouns. Actually, you know, if you did something foolish in your life, you're a fool, right? That's what English tells you. And of course, there's one or two of you in here did something stupid, and that makes you stupid, right? And if you killed somebody, that makes you a killer, right? That's the way English talks about people. We love to turn people into categories of people. We like to look at categories of things. Actually, we're very much, the way that we talk in English, we're very much like a physics student who, when solving problems having to do with light, only uses the particle formula and never uses the wave formula. In English, we turn the world into nouns instead of turning the world into waves. And nouns have served us well. It's important that we know how to use the particle formula, but it's also important that we learn to look at what is actually taking place in terms of the actual verb. What was it that you did that was not so smart, and when did you do it? So that having done something in the past doesn't have to turn us into anything. On the all-purpose handout which we've got up here, it's not made up for this particular talk. Number one says, these linguistic fallacies occur when we unjustifiably turn past events into present characteristics. Then it's an error. We would call this labeling, I think, in our culture. Let's look at some of the fallacies. English teaches us the word noun. Notice that also, when talking about objects, thinks about objects. This is quite different from other philosophies. If we were studying reality from a Buddhist perspective, we would be very interested in understanding how this particular object came into being. And what are the typical things that lead that object out of being? Sometimes we're so distressed when our cars fall apart because we're not maintaining them. We think about the car as an object. It's actually a great conglomeration of events. And if we want things to stay the same, we've got to be performing maintenance to make those things stay approximately the same. Everything in the universe is in a state of flux. In point of fact, we may be able to use the particle formula every now and then and get away with it and get some good answers. But in point of fact, everything in the universe is in a constant state of flux. And quite often we need to be taking that into consideration when we have not taken that into consideration. Nouns and adjectives are really pretty much the same thing. The present tense aspect, this would be where the person who kills the killer, he's the kind of person who kills. He's the kind of person who murders. I give you a list of a variety of present tense forms, but one of those present tense forms is particularly susceptible to the fallacy that we're looking at here, and that is the habitual present tense form. And I think it's important that we challenge that habitual present tense form to see whether or not it applies to our particular situation. fourth fallacy takes the form of, look at what you made me do. You're making me mad. You're responsible for my behavior. I'm not responsible for my behavior. If you would just straighten out your life, then I would be okay. This is that philosophy that leads us to believe, actually that's another form of a disempowering command, leading us to think that the way that we feel within ourselves is dependent upon what other people are doing or what is taking place around us. Notice that it's kind of a superstition in our culture that there's something going on in the corner that we don't like. One of the ways that we can really demonstrate that we don't like it is by making ourselves sick in the head, give ourselves headaches, elevate the heart rate, give ourselves stomach diseases, damaging rituals of emotion. That's how we show our sincerity, isn't it? For a while, this was an important part of the women's movement, because for a long time it was not appropriate for women to demonstrate their anger. And so I think it was important for people to pass through a period of really showing that anger. But it was also a position to pass through. Because if you've got the male chauvinist pig using you, and your response to the male chauvinist pig is to make yourself physically ill, that's playing into the hands of the enemy. So we wouldn't want to continue to use the emotional rituals where they become dangerous to us and really play into the hands of those who oppose us. Now, what I propose with these fallacies, the first three, is a little formula kind of in the upper right-hand corner of your handout. And what we do there is turn the nouns, the adjectives, and present tense verbs into past tense verbs. So if someone is a killer, what we say then is, he killed. He did what he did. And we may want to take a look at him as he comes around to keep our eye on him, or we may not. That would be up to us to decide. Notice the term liar, like run right across the top there. If we're talking about one of the folks that we see in the three-piece suit on Sunday mornings at the so-called news broadcast, where the person lowers his voice a few times and looks right at you and tells you deliberate lies, the kind of things that I would assume maybe you learn a little bit about in communications programs occasionally. You certainly learn about that in salesmanship. You certainly learn about that in the law school, where you have to learn to tell many, many deliberate lies with a very straight face and be looking right at the people that whose minds you wish to change. Or it may be in medical school or nursing school, where you have to keep a really straight face and maintain the illusion that you know what's going on when you know very well what you've done. All right, there are a lot of illusions involved here. If we are talking about someone who is currently receiving most of their money from telling lies, and this person has been doing this for quite some time, and they've got plans to do it next week, I think we're justified then in calling them liars. But when we're talking about one of our little children who has just told us something that is not true, then I think we've got a bit of a problem. Because even that little child will intuit from the way the language is constructed that if I said something that was not true, that turns me into a liar in English. This is a very difficult situation for a person to be in. So I think this can contaminate our daily life in many kinds of ways. So what we can do then is say what we did when we did it. The general semantics people are pretty good at clarifying meaning. And the term did would refer to, say that we're speaking of myself, and I was referred to perhaps as a professor. Well, it may be important to know just when and where was he professing, and how much time does he spend professing. And what else does he do besides profess? And how does he differ in his professing from other professors? As you can see, what this does is break down all those little blocks, all those little boxes, all those taxonomies that we intuitively accept without challenging. With attribution, suppose that I'm saying, it drives me crazy when I see people eating in class. I can't stand it. What I'm doing then is saying that my behavior is going to be triggered, and we all know folks have all little buttons. You don't have to do hardly anything to push one of those buttons, and then they go into their little damaging rituals of emotion on the basis of the button being pushed. I would think that we might want to translate such a thing as to say maybe you started eating and then I started getting angry, so that we own the emotions that we are producing and we not blame them on other folk. Right on four fallacies that are downing, adding, habitual present tense, and attribution. Another aspect of language that I think is really important that sometimes we're even fearful of looking at them. The term is modals. And I give you a little list. Let's see. Yeah, sourcing the force of modals. And these are words like may, might, should, ought, things of that sort. Shall. And what I'm suggesting that we really need to be doing is to be checking into the meaning of those words. This is a very complicated issue, by the way. The variety of meanings that we can find for a modal are almost infinite. But what I suggest that we do is only look at the particular circumstance that lies before us. That way we don't have to be concerned with the total complexity, but just the situation that faces us at the moment. Let's take the term can't. Let's have dinner tomorrow. Answer, I can't. Normally that will mean, really, I don't want to. Another meaning of I can't. How about flying over to my house unaided from your house? I can't. Meaning, this is something that I cannot currently do, and even with a lot of practice, I don't think I'd be able to bring it off. Physically incapable in the present and in the future. Let's go swimming tomorrow. I can't swim. Well, maybe you can't now, but you could learn. What I'm wanting to point out to you is that the meaning of the modal varies greatly within our own usages, and we very often do not examine what those words mean. And sometimes those meanings can be very important. Supposing the answer was yes, I will eat dinner with you tomorrow. Now for some people, this used to be before the women's movement, when a woman asked a woman out for dinner, and the answer was yes, I will meet with you, what that will meant was, unless an attractive man asks me out, in which case that will was then set aside. Maybe you have in your experience lots of folks who, when they tell you that they're going to do something and they use a form of that future tense, you know that's about a 1 in 3 chance that they're going to do what they say that they will do. Other folks, when they say they're going to do it, if they're alive, they're going to find a way to fulfill their obligation. I'm suggesting to you then with all of those modals that it's very useful for us, especially where we have something important at issue. And we check into what that person means by that modal. Of course, the question that the parent hates to hear is, why should I? Because what is involved there? Very often what's involved is physical threat. So we have a lot of people who want to be able to manipulate you through physical threat without presenting the actual physical threat. And then very often if they get physical threats back, they act as if this is a terrible thing for you to be doing, as if they have not been doing it all along. Some of the things that we discover when we look into the molar may be nasty shocks, very unhappy discoveries. But I think we're better off knowing what it is that we're dealing with than dealing with this out of ignorance. All right, sourcing the force of motives. Now, when I talked about attribution, and we talked about getting angry, in a way, at this point, I've really made things worse. Because before, it was possible I could do as a friend of mine, actually as a faculty member's mother, was talking to me at a cocktail party, and she explained to me that the reason that she was an alcoholic was because of her husband, who had at that time been dead for 10 years, now he's been dead for 15 years. And he was down there in the coffin, and he was making a drink. And she was having a lot of bleach stuff, was built upon what it was that was making her do what she was doing. Now, in a way, I've left you with a worse situation than you had before, because before, in my own case, I had a great deal of difficulty giving up my anger toward my ex-wife. It was very important for me to show how miserable I was, so as to demonstrate how wrong the ex-wife was. I mean, after all, if I didn't make myself miserable, that would be the same thing as telling her and telling everyone else that she was right. So very often we have a lot invested in making ourselves ill and in blaming somebody else for what we're bringing upon ourselves. Now, what can we do about that? In a way, what I've done now, you could say I've left myself worse off than I was before. Because before I was miserable, and at least I could blame it on her. Now all I've got is myself to blame. So I'm worse off now than I was before. Well, I'm not going to leave you there. If you choose to examine your emotions, like anger, fear, and sadness, among other things, what you will discover is that there is a script, that dirty, I wish, and you will find a lot of fallacies that will be eligible for analysis and change. You will find a lot of modals, she should have, that need to be sourced to examine. You will also find that there are physical sensations going on in your body. Now, if you choose to, you can observe those physical sensations. And if you choose to observe them, that turns out to be a way of relaxing those tensions. A lot of gynecologists, actually I was taught this technique by a gynecologist who was working for a group known as EST, Earhart Seminars Training, some of you may be familiar. And basically what one does is observe those tensions. And the act of observation in itself is enough to allow those tensions to dissipate. All right, so the four main things that I'm looking at here with you, I probably should have done these out earlier. I've never used these before, and these are kind of pedagogical tools of some sort, I guess. The first thing is a symbol of the off switch. Here's the off switch. And this is the plug that goes into the part of your left brain that makes all that chatter. So that's plugged in there. And so what one learns to do is to turn off that chatter that goes into the brain. Now that actually gives you a whole lot more energy to use for observation. Because not only does your energy not have to go into churning out all that chatter, you also can relax that part of your brain that listens to all that chatter and puts it in your memory. So there really is an enormous increase in available energy for observation when you turn off the chatter. And of course, the problem here with fallacy, this is a fallacy alarm. It looks better than a dog. So whenever there's something really serious going on in your life, that's a good time to take a look at those nouns. Take a look at those adjectives. Take a look at those present tense forms and see if they really do add up under your examination. Or are they unjustifiable extensions of past events into present characteristics? And then the modals. This is a modal sourcer. This is a way of finding out what that modal means. You know, a lot of times when someone asks us something and we're not able to do it, well, it really is that we can't. Because we're caught in the can't. I can't go. Okay? And so we get to look and see what it is that we can't do. Or maybe there's something that we have to do. And so the modal will just carry us off and force us to do things beyond our will. What I'm asking, of course, here is that we really just examine what the modal means. And the term I use there is source the force of the modal. Let's go to the last part here. I want to conclude by bringing this together in terms of language and reality. If in some sense we are meaning by reality the totality of what is, including ourselves, including our language, all of it, everything, it's pretty clear to me that we don't have access to the totality of what is. What we have access to is what we get through our senses, what we get through various instruments, what we get from different perspectives, and what we can do is bring those perspectives together and compare them, but we just aren't going to have access to what is. Sorry about that. That just turns out to be the nature of the universe. As a matter of fact, if you go through the Heisenberg principle, you know that the more things that you do to try and find out the nature of the universe, the more things you're doing to the universe to actually change the situation that you're observing, the so-called observer effect. If I'd been at your house this morning and you were getting ready to come to school, I guarantee you would not have lived your life the way that you did. The fact that someone is there looking at you changes your behavior. And the whole universe operates in that same kind of a way. We're in a mutual cosmic dance from which we cannot sit down. We can't get away from that dance. There's no way to get away. We can reduce that observer effect, but we cannot make it disappear. But our language then has been, on occasion, then a static, a form of interference that has reduced our ability to see what is taking place. So we can't see the universe as it is, but we can look at it. So what we've been doing is putting chatter between us and our physical perceptors. Furthermore, we have used language as a useful map, but also as a misleading map that often makes us think that it's appropriate to disempower ourselves, to make ourselves less than what we are. And there's an awful lot of reinforcement around for that kind of concept. After all, I can't handle this problem. You handle it for me. It can be very, very rewarding. And I'm sure all of us have been on maybe on both sides of that little number. So there's a lot of reinforcement for us to give ourselves this empowered command. Oh, my sweet little baby girl, speaking of a wife. Very interesting the kinds of terminology that we will use and how they are so often reinforced. The damaging rituals of emotion. I don't like what's going on, so what I'm going to do is make myself physically ill. As a matter of fact, the normal ritual within our culture is something great happened. I'm going to go, so what I'm going to do now is celebrate by poisoning myself and my neighbors. And of course the other one is something terrible happened. So what I'm going to do is poison myself and my neighbors. And I think if you take a look at your own behavior, that statistically that would be pretty close to the truth. The kinds of things that you do to celebrate and the kinds of things that you do when things don't go well will pretty often involve doing harm to yourself and harm to your neighbors. That's our regular way of celebrating. All right, so what I'm alleging that we need to do then is clean up our left and right brain. In terms of the left brain, I'm saying let's work on the fallacies. Now I've named what I call the linguistic fallacies only because these are, I think, something you have not heard of. I think it's also useful for us to take the logic course and learn some more about fallacies than I've mentioned today. But I think it's essential that we clean up our left brain chatter, that we make our thought processes much more logical than they have been up till now. And I think it's important that we allow our right brain access, especially that conscious right brain, access to our sense data. Now, in terms of, if we were to categorize everything I've talked about, notice that this could come under Eastern philosophy, it could come under modern physics, it could come under modern psychology.